The breaking point didn't look dramatic. It looked ordinary. My name is Hannah. I was 45 years old, standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at a shelf of pasta sauce, unable to decide which one to buy. Not because the choice mattered, because I was exhausted from making every choice. For years, I had been the person everyone leaned on. At work, I was the one who noticed details others missed. At home, I was the one who remembered birthdays, appointments, school deadlines. In my family, I was the calm one, the fixer, the listener. People said I was strong. What they didn't see was how strength slowly turned into expectation. I worked as an operations manager for a mid-sized logistics company in Atlanta. Fast decisions, constant coordination, no room for error. At home, my husband worked long hours, not because he avoided responsibility, because he trusted me to handle things. And I did. Until one day I realized something unsettling. No one was asking if I could still carry it all. They just assumed I would. That night after dinner, my teenage daughter asked if I could help with a school project. My husband asked about a bill he couldn't find. My phone buzzed with a work message marked urgent. I stood there holding my plate and felt something inside me go quiet. Not angry, empty. I helped with the project, found the bill, answered the email. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. I didn't cry. I just stared at the floor and thought, if I stopped doing all of this, what would happen? The question scared me, not because everything would fall apart, but because a part of me hoped it would. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else. I made coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table. No lists, no planning, no multitasking. Just a quiet realization. I wasn't tired because life was hard. I was tired because I had made myself indispensable. At work later that day, a colleague asked if I could just take care of an issue that wasn't mine. The words came out before I could stop them. "I can't," I said. "You'll have to handle it." He looked surprised. So did I. Nothing bad happened. The world didn't end. That moment stayed with me. In the evening, my husband noticed I was quieter than usual. He asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know I can't keep doing things alone." He nodded slowly, not defensive, confused. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. I had built my identity around being needed, and now I wasn't sure who I was without that role. The thought was terrifying and freeing. At 45, I wasn't having a breakdown. I was having an awakening, one that would force uncomfortable conversations at home, at work, inside myself. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to truth. And once you feel that, pretending becomes impossible. The shift didn't announce itself. It showed up in the reactions I wasn't prepared for. The first real resistance came at work. After I declined that small task, my colleague hesitated before speaking to me again. Not angry, uncertain. A few days later, during a meeting, my manager assigned me another temporary responsibility. I waited until he finished. "I can't take that on," I said. "My plate is full." The room went quiet. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else looked at their notes. My manager frowned, not harshly, just surprised. "You've always handled these things," he said. "I know, that's why I'm being careful now." The meeting moved on, but the energy had changed. Later that day, a coworker stopped by my desk. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm just setting limits." She smiled faintly. "I wish I could do that." That stayed with me. At home, the reactions were different, but just as complicated. My husband tried to help more, not smoothly, not confidently. He forgot things, did them differently, missed details I would have caught. Each mistake tempted me to step back in, to fix, to smooth, to reclaim control. But I didn't. Not because I wanted things to fall apart, because I needed proof that they wouldn't. One evening, dinner was late. The kitchen was messier than usual. My daughter looked annoyed. "This used to be easier," she said. I met her eyes. "It was easier for you," I replied gently, "not for me." She didn't respond, but she heard me. That night, my husband said something that surprised me. "He didn't realize how much you were doing," he said. "I thought you liked it." I liked being appreciated. That's not the same thing. The conversation didn't fix anything immediately, but it cracked something open. The next test came with my parents. My mother called, stressed about an appointment mix-up. Normally, I would have dropped everything. Instead, I listened and then paused. "Have you asked Dad to help?" I said. She hesitated. "I suppose I could." "Yes," I said, "you could." After the call ended, guilt flooded in. Old habits die hard, but beneath the guilt was something steadier. Relief. I began noticing how often people defaulted to me, not out of malice, out of habit, and how often I had reinforced that habit. At work, I left on time one evening. No explanation, no apology, just left. The next day, nothing had collapsed. Deadlines were met, emails were answered, the system adjusted. That realization unsettled me, not because I wasn't important, because I wasn't irreplaceable, and that truth, oddly enough, felt like freedom. At home, my daughter started handling more of her own responsibilities, clumsily at first, then better. My husband asked more questions, sometimes too many, but they were questions, not assumptions. Late one night, I sat alone on the couch and felt something unfamiliar. Space. Not emptiness. Space. And space gave me a new question. If I'm not holding everything together, what do I want to hold? The answer didn't come immediately, but it had room to arrive. The hardest resistance didn't come from work or family. It came from inside me. Once I stopped filling every gap, I started noticing how uncomfortable silence felt, how quickly my mind searched for something useful to do, someone to help, a problem to solve. I had built my sense of worth on motion. Stillness felt like failure. At work, I caught myself volunteering in subtle ways, offering suggestions no one asked for, staying late just in case, checking in on projects that weren't mine. Old habits trying to reclaim territory. One afternoon, my manager stopped by my desk. "You seem different lately," he said. "Different how?" I asked. "More contained," he replied, "less reactive." I waited for criticism. It didn't come. "Honestly," he added, "it's not a bad thing." That surprised me. I had assumed pulling back would make me invisible. Instead, it made me clearer. At home, the shift continued. My husband struggled with the new balance, not because he wanted me to do everything again, because he didn't know how to show up without my instructions. One evening he asked, "Can you just tell me what you want me to handle?" I shook my head. "I don't want to manage you," I said. "I want to trust you." The room went quiet. Trust felt heavier than tasks. My daughter reacted differently. She became distant, less talkative. One night she snapped, "You're not as available anymore." I took a breath. "You're right," I said, "and that doesn't mean I care less." She crossed her arms. "It feels like it." The words hurt more than I expected, but I didn't retreat. "I'm still here," I said, "just not in the same way." She didn't respond, but she stayed in the room. That mattered. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I had an afternoon free, truly free. No errands, no emergencies, no obligations. I didn't know what to do with it. I wandered through a bookstore, touching spines without intent to buy. I sat in a park and watched people move through their lives. I realized how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to be unproductive without guilt. The realization was both peaceful and unsettling. At home that night, I opened an old notebook, not to plan, to write. I wrote down everything I had been holding for other people: responsibilities, emotional labor, unspoken expectations. The list was long. Then I wrote a second list: things I wanted but had postponed. Time alone, creative work, rest without explanation. The second list felt unfamiliar, but alive. The next day, I made a decision, a real one. I requested a reduced leadership scope at work, not a demotion, a recalibration. My manager listened, asked questions, then said, "If that's what you need to stay effective, we can make it work." I walked out of his office shaking, not from fear, from the realization that I could have asked sooner. That evening, I told my husband. He looked at me for a long time. "Are you leaving?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "I'm staying, but not the way I was." He nodded slowly. "I need to learn how to meet you there," he said. So did I. I realized then that letting go wasn't a single act. It was a practice, and practice, by definition, allows imperfection. I wasn't abandoning responsibility. I was redistributing it, and that redistribution was changing everything. The change didn't feel triumphant. It felt quieter than that, more grounded. Once I stopped holding everything together, I noticed how much energy I'd been spending just maintaining the illusion of control. At work, my days became more focused. Fewer meetings, clearer priorities, less urgency disguised as importance. People adjusted faster than I expected. Some responsibilities moved elsewhere. Some simply disappeared. I realized how many things had only existed because I was willing to absorb them. At home, the shift took longer. My husband struggled at first, not because he didn't care, because he had relied on my constancy without noticing the cost. We had awkward moments, missed cues, unfinished tasks, silences that felt heavier than arguments. But slowly, something else emerged: partnership. Not efficiency, not convenience, presence. My daughter began managing her own schedule, not perfectly, but honestly. One evening, she forgot an assignment deadline and faced the consequence herself. I wanted to intervene, to rescue. I didn't. Later, she said, "I guess I needed to learn that." I nodded. So did I. The most surprising change happened inside me. I stopped scanning rooms for what needed fixing, stopped anticipating needs that hadn't been spoken. I listened more, to others, to myself. One Saturday morning, I woke up with no plans and no anxiety. That had never happened before. I made coffee and sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. I didn't feel behind. I felt present. At work, my manager checked in. "You seem steadier," he said. "I am," I replied. Not because things were easier, because they were truer. That distinction mattered. I understood then that being needed can feel like purpose, but it isn't the same as being chosen. I had spent years earning my place by overextending. Now I was learning to occupy space without justification. One evening, my husband said something quietly. "I miss you," he said. "I'm still here. I just don't disappear anymore." He smiled. "I see that now." The world didn't fall apart when I stopped carrying it. It rebalanced, not perfectly, but honestly. If you're listening to this and feeling worn down by the weight of being everyone's anchor, please hear this. You don't owe exhaustion to anyone. You don't need to collapse to deserve rest. And you are allowed to stop holding things that were never meant to be yours alone. At 45, I didn't abandon my life. I stopped carrying it by myself. And in doing so, I finally had room to live inside it.